The rain fell like tears from heaven that night, each droplet carrying the weight of broken promises and shattered dreams. I stood at my apartment window, watching a figure hunched beneath the amber glow of the streetlight below. 3 weeks had passed since I'd thrown his belongings onto the wet pavement like garbage, and there he sat, Adrian White, the man who had carved out my heart with surgical precision and fed it to his own greed. His expensive jacket, the one I'd bought him for his birthday, was now soaked through. His perfectly styled hair hung limp against his skull. He looked pathetic, desperate, broken. Everything he had once called me. But this wasn't the end of my story. This was merely the crescendo of a symphony of revenge that had been playing since the moment I heard him laugh at my expense in that restaurant 3 weeks ago. The moment I discovered that love for Adrian White was nothing more than a business transaction. And I had just collected the final payment. Before we continue, please write in the comment which country you are watching this video. We love knowing where our global family is tuning in from. And if this is your first time on this channel, please subscribe. Your support helps us bring even more epic revenge tales of life. Enjoy listening. My name is Melinda Hollins, and until 3 weeks ago, I believed I was living in a fairy tale. The kind where the prince rescues the princess, where love conquers all, where happily ever after isn't just a myth sold in romance novels. I should have known better. After all, I'm an accountant. Numbers don't lie. People do. It started on a Thursday evening in October. The autumn air had that crisp bite that made you want to curl up with someone you loved, share a bottle of wine, and pretend the world outside didn't exist. I had been planning our dinner for weeks. Reservations at Chateau Marmont, the same restaurant where Adrian had first told me he loved me 8 months ago. I was standing in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting the black dress that hugged my curves just right. The dress Adrian had chosen for me during one of our shopping trips. "You look stunning in black," he'd said, his hands sliding down my waist. "It brings out the intensity in your eyes." Those same eyes now stared back at me from the mirror, bright with anticipation. I had news to share with Adrian tonight. Good news. My promotion to senior partner at Nelson & Associates had finally come through, along with a substantial raise. We could finally move in together, maybe even start talking about marriage. The future stretched before us like a golden highway. My phone buzzed against the dresser. Adrian's name lit up the screen, accompanied by the photo I'd taken of him last month at the beach. His perfect smile, his sun-kissed skin, his eyes that seemed to hold all the warmth in the world. "Hey, beautiful." His voice was smooth as honey through the speaker. "Hey yourself, handsome. I'm just finishing up here. Should I meet you at the restaurant or—" "Actually, babe, that's why I'm calling." There was something different in his tone. A hesitation that made my stomach flutter with unease. "I have to cancel tonight." The red lipstick I'd been applying slipped from my fingers, clattering to the hardwood floor. "Cancel? Adrian, we've had these reservations for—" I know. And I'm sorry, Mel. Really. But my parents called and they need to see me tonight. It's important. I bent to retrieve the lipstick, my heart sinking. "Well, can't I come with you? I love your parents and they—" "No." The word came out sharper than he'd intended. I could hear him catch himself, soften his voice. "No, babe. It's family business. Private stuff. You understand, right?" I stared at my reflection, noting how the excitement had drained from my features. "Of course. Family comes first. You're the best, Mel. This is why I love you so much. I'll make it up to you this weekend, okay? We'll go somewhere special. Just the two of us." After we hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed for a long moment, still wearing the black dress that suddenly felt too tight, too hopeful. Something gnawed at the edges of my consciousness. A tiny voice whispering that Adrian had been distant lately, that his kisses had felt rehearsed, that he'd been more interested in my wallet than my words. But I silenced that voice. Love meant trust. Love meant giving someone the benefit of the doubt. Love, I was about to learn, could also mean being played for a fool. I should have stayed home. Should have ordered Chinese food, opened a bottle of wine, and binge-watched romantic comedies while nursing my disappointment. Instead, I found myself walking down 5th Street 40 minutes later, still wearing that black dress, but now with a dark hoodie pulled over my head and a baseball cap casting shadows across my face. I told myself I was just going for a walk. Just clearing my head. The fact that I was walking in the direction of Chateau Marmont was pure coincidence. The restaurant glowed like a warm beacon against the cold October night. Through the large windows, I could see couples leaning across candlelit tables, sharing intimate conversations and stolen glances. The life I thought I was living just hours ago. I was about to turn away when I saw them. Adrian sat at a corner table, his back to the window. But I would recognize those broad shoulders anywhere, the way he unconsciously ran his fingers through his dark hair when he was nervous. Across from him sat a woman with flowing auburn hair and a laugh that seemed to light up the entire restaurant. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. Beside them, like living proof of my worst nightmare, sat Margie and Colton White, Adrian's parents, the people who had welcomed me into their family with open arms, who had invited me to Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations, who had treated me like the daughter they'd never had. The same people who were now beaming at the auburn-haired woman like she was their greatest treasure. I found myself moving closer, drawn by a sick fascination I couldn't resist. There was a small table just behind theirs, partially hidden by a decorative pillar. I slipped into the chair with my back to them, pulled my hood lower, and pretended to study the menu while my entire world crumbled around me. "Bessie, darling," Margie White's voice was warm with affection. "You look absolutely radiant." "Doesn't she look radiant, Colton?" "Beautiful as ever," Adrian's father agreed. "We're so glad you two worked things out." "Bessie." The name hit me like a physical blow. I knew that name. Adrian had mentioned her in passing during our early dates. His college girlfriend, the one who had broken his heart when she moved to California for her career. The one who got away. "I never should have left." Bessie's voice was soft, musical. "Everything mine wasn't. These past 2 years have been miserable without Adrian. When I got the job offer here in New York, I knew it was fate giving us a second chance." I watched through my peripheral vision as Adrian reached across the table, his fingers intertwining with hers. The same fingers that had traced patterns across my skin just days ago, that had whispered promises against my lips in the darkness of my bedroom. "I never stopped loving you," Adrian said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not for a single day." The words were a knife twisting in my chest. Not for a single day. What about the 8 months he'd spent with me? What about the "I love you" he'd whispered against my neck, the plans we'd made, the future we'd mapped out together? What about Tanya? Margie asked suddenly. My heart stopped. Tanya. But my name was Melinda. Unless. Adrian's laugh was cold, cruel. A sound I'd never heard from him before. That pathetic girl. She's just my walking aim. The menu slipped from my numb fingers. I felt like I was drowning, like the air in the restaurant had turned to water and I was sinking deeper with every word. "I've been using her while trying to get you back," Adrian continued, his voice casual, conversational, as if he were discussing the weather. "She pays for everything. My car, my clothes, even my phone bill. Hell, she probably paid for this dinner without even knowing it, since I used the credit card she gave me for emergencies. The Black American Express card. The one I'd given him last month when his own card had been temporarily frozen. The one that was connected directly to my account. When are you going to, end things with her?" Bessie asked, and I could hear the slight discomfort in her voice. At least someone at that table had a conscience. "Next week," Adrian said without hesitation. "Once you move back in with me. I figure that's enough time for her to pay for the security deposit on our new place." Our new place. The apartment I'd been apartment hunting for over the past month. The apartment I thought we were going to share. "You're smart, son," Colton White said, and I could hear the approval in his voice. "Why work when some desperate girl will pay for everything? You've always been clever that way." Their laughter echoed around me like the sound of breaking glass. 3 people I had trusted, had loved, had welcomed into my life, laughing at my expense. Laughing at my love, my generosity, my stupidity. I sat there for another 10 minutes, listening to them plan their future together. The future that was being built on the foundation of my broken heart and empty bank account. They talked about the apartment I was unknowingly financing, the wedding they wanted to have next spring, the children they hoped to raise together. Not once did Adrian's voice waver with guilt. Not once did he seem to remember that somewhere across town his walking ATM was waiting for him to call, to apologize for missing their dinner, to reschedule their life together. When I finally stood up, my legs shaking beneath me, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the restaurant window. The woman staring back at me was a stranger, hollow-eyed, broken, pathetic. Everything Adrian had called me. But as I walked away from that restaurant, as I left behind the laughter and the lies and the life I thought I'd been living, Something crystallized inside me. The pain was still there, sharp and immediate, but beneath it was something else. Something harder, colder. Something that tasted like revenge. I don't remember the walk home. One moment I was standing outside Chateau Marmont, watching my entire world collapse through a window, and the next I was fumbling with the keys to my apartment, my hands shaking so violently I could barely get them in the lock. The apartment felt different as I stepped inside. The same furniture, the same photos of Adrian and me scattered across every surface, the same throw blanket he'd bought me for our 3-month anniversary. But now it all felt contaminated, poisoned by the truth I'd just witnessed. I walked through the rooms like a ghost, seeing everything with new eyes. The expensive watch on my nightstand, the one Adrian claimed his grandmother had left him, but which I'd later found the receipt for hidden in my own purse. The designer clothes hanging in my closet beside my own, clothes I'd bought him during our shopping trips, telling myself that generosity was just another way of showing love. The laptop on my kitchen counter, the one he used for his freelance graphic design work. Work that never seemed to produce any income, any clients, any actual graphics. Just excuse after excuse about why he needed more time, more space, more of my money to invest in his future. Our future, he'd always said. But there had never been an hour for Adrian White. There had only been his and mine to give. I found his things everywhere. Like a cancer that had spread through my life, claiming territory I hadn't even realized I'd surrendered. His toiletries in my bathroom, his shoes by my door, his coffee cups in my sink. Evidence of 8 months of systematic manipulation disguised as love. The anger came in waves. First, the hot, immediate rage that made me want to scream, to throw things, to call him and unleash every curse word I'd ever learned. Then the cold, calculating fury that whispered about justice, about consequences, about making him pay for every lie he'd told and every dollar he'd stolen. But beneath both types of anger was something far worse, shame. The crushing, suffocating shame of having been so thoroughly fooled. Of having been so desperate for love that I'd ignored every red flag, explained away every inconsistency, made excuses for every cruel word or dismissive gesture. I was a successful, intelligent woman. I had a master's degree in accounting, a partnership in a prestigious firm, and the respect of my colleagues. But when it came to Adrian White, I'd been nothing more than a walking ATM with feelings. A resource to be exploited, a fool to be managed. That's when the plan began to form. I started with his belongings. Every shirt I'd bought him, every pair of shoes I'd paid for, every electronic device that bore my fingerprints on the receipt. I gathered them methodically, efficiently, the same way I approached complex financial audits at work. No emotion, no hesitation, just cold, professional execution. The rain had started again by the time I reached the front entrance of my building. Perfect. I opened the door and began dropping Adrian's life onto the wet sidewalk. The designer jacket I'd bought him for his birthday, soaked within seconds. The leather shoes that had cost me half a month's salary, already gathering puddle water between the soles. The expensive cologne, the silk ties, the cashmere sweaters. Everything that had ever made him feel like he deserved better than what he could earn for himself. Mrs. Rodriguez from 4B was walking her dog when I made my final trip downstairs. She paused, watching me dump the last armload of clothes onto the growing pile. "Spring cleaning?" she asked with a knowing smile. "Something like that," I replied, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Good for you, Mija," she said, her wise old eyes twinkling. "Sometimes we have to throw out the trash before we can see how clean our house really is." After she'd walked away, I stood there for a moment, looking at the soggy monument to my own stupidity. 8 months of Adrian White, reduced to a pile of wet fabric and broken promises on a New York sidewalk. But this wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. I went back upstairs and opened my laptop. If Adrian thought I was just a pathetic walking ATM, then it was time to show him exactly how smart this ATM really was. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But as I sat in my apartment that night, surrounded by bank statements and credit card records, I discovered that revenge was actually best served with meticulous attention to detail and a thorough understanding of financial law. Being an accountant had its advantages. I started with the credit cards. The Black American Express I'd given him for emergencies showed a fascinating pattern of charges over the past 3 months. Expensive dinners at restaurants I'd never been to, with Bessie, I now realized. Hotel room charges during weekends when he'd claimed to be visiting his sick uncle in Jersey. Shopping sprees at high-end boutiques where he'd clearly been buying gifts for someone who wasn't me. The total was staggering. Over $15,000 in unauthorized charges, all carefully hidden from me through clever timing and forged signatures on the monthly statements that came to my address. Then there were the cash advances. Small amounts, never enough to trigger fraud alerts, but frequent enough to add up to several thousand more dollars. Money that had funded his double life, his real relationship, his true priorities. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I documented everything. Screenshots, printed records, detailed spreadsheets breaking down every fraudulent transaction. I'd prosecuted corporate embezzlement cases with less evidence than what Adrian had handed me on a silver platter. But the financial fraud was just the beginning. I dug deeper into his digital footprint. The laptop he'd left on my kitchen counter was a treasure trove of information. His email accounts, his social media profiles, his text messages, all of it synchronized and backed up, all of it revealing the true scope of his deception. The emails with Bessie went back 6 months. 6 months of planning their reunion, of coordinating his manipulation of me, of laughing about this stupid rich girl who was funding their love affair. There were detailed discussions about which of my possessions they wanted to keep when he moved in with her, mockery of my appearance and personality, and strategic advice about how to extract the maximum amount of money from me before the inevitable breakup. But the most damning evidence was in his text messages with his friend Jake Damien, a sleazy wannabe pickup artist who apparently served as Adrian's mentor in the fine art of financial seduction. Jake, how's the money train running? Adrian, full steam ahead. Just got her to pay for my car insurance for the whole year. Told her I wanted us to combine our finances as a step toward marriage. Jake, classic move. How much you think she's worth total? Adrian, her apartment alone is probably worth $800K. Plus she just made partner at her firm. I'm talking serious money here. Jake, and she has no idea? Adrian, none. She thinks I'm her soulmate. It's almost sad how desperate she is. Almost sad. My 8 months of love, devotion, and genuine happiness were almost sad to him. I kept reading, my fury building with each exchange. Adrian, Bessie's moving back next month. Time to wrap this up. Jake, you gonna let her down easy? Trin, why waste time with feelings? I'll just ghost her after I get the deposit for the new place. Let her figure it out. Jake, cold man. I like it. Adrian, she'll probably cry for a week then find some other loser to pay her bills. Girls like her always do. Girls like her. Girls like me. Desperate, pathetic, worthless except for the numbers in our bank accounts. I stared at the screen for a long time after I finished reading, feeling something shift inside my chest. The grief and shame were still there, but they were being consumed by something far more powerful. Something that tasted like steel and sounded like thunder. Adrian White had made a critical error. He'd assumed that his walking ATM was just another empty-headed victim who would cry herself to sleep and move on. He'd never considered that his walking ATM might be smarter than him, more connected than him, and infinitely more dangerous than him. It was time to teach him that lesson. Thursday morning brought crisp autumn sunshine and a clarity of purpose I hadn't felt in months. I dressed carefully, my best black suit, the one that made me look like exactly what I was. A woman who could destroy someone's life with a few well-placed phone calls. My first stop was Nelson & Associates. My partner, Elizabeth Hall, looked up from her computer as I entered the office, her sharp eyes immediately noting my expression. You look like someone who's about to ruin somebody's week, she observed with approval. Please tell me it involves that pretty boy you've been wasting money on. Elizabeth had never liked Adrian. From the moment I'd introduced them at the company Christmas party, she'd watched him with the same expression she reserved for clients who tried to hide assets during divorce proceedings. Suspicious, calculating, and utterly unimpressed. It involves a lot more than his week, I said, settling into the chair across from her desk. I need a favor, Liz. And it's going to require your special talents. Elizabeth Hall was more than just my business partner. Before joining Nelson & Associates, she'd spent 10 years as a forensic accountant for the FBI, specializing in financial crimes and asset recovery. She had connections throughout law enforcement, the banking industry, and the shadowy world of private investigation. More importantly, she had absolutely no tolerance for men who preyed on successful women. Tell me everything, she said, leaning back in her chair with the satisfied smile of a predator who'd just spotted wounded prey. I laid it all out for her. The credit card fraud, the emotional manipulation, the systematic theft disguised as love. I showed her the emails, the text messages, the detailed financial records of Adrian's crimes. By the time I finished, Elizabeth's expression had gone from interested to professionally outraged. "This little bastard has been running a textbook-long con," she said, scrolling through the evidence on my laptop. "And he's been stupid enough to leave a digital paper trail that a first-year law student could follow. What do you want to do to him, Mel?" "Everything legal," I said. "And maybe a few things that are technically legal but morally questionable." "My favorite kind of revenge," Elizabeth grinned. "Let me make some calls." While Elizabeth worked her magic, I made my own calls. To the credit card companies reporting unauthorized use. To the bank flagging suspicious transactions. To the apartment complex where Adrian was planning to move in with Bessie, informing them that any deposit paid with my financial information was fraudulent. But those were just the opening moves. My next call was to Miranda Walsh, my college roommate who now worked as a senior producer at Channel 7 News. Miranda specialized in consumer protection stories, the kind of investigative pieces that destroyed people's reputations and followed them for years. "Mel." Miranda's voice was bright with genuine affection. "It's been too long. Please tell me you're calling with a story. I'm dying for something with real teeth." "I'm calling with a story," I confirmed. "How would you like to expose a serial romance scammer who's been targeting successful women across the city?" The pause on the other end was pregnant with possibility. "Keep talking," Miranda said. I gave her the condensed version, focusing on the broader pattern of Adrian's behavior rather than my personal heartbreak. As I spoke, I could practically hear her journalistic instincts kicking into overdrive. "This is perfect," she said when I finished. "Financial predators who target professional women? That's exactly the kind of story our demographic wants to see. And if he's done this to you, he's probably done it to others." "That's what I'm hoping you'll help me find out," I said. "Consider it done. I'll put my research team on this immediately. We'll find every woman he's scammed, every lie he's told, every dollar he's stolen. And then we'll put it all on the evening news with his face in high definition." By the time I hung up with Miranda, I was feeling more like myself than I had in months. This was what I was good at. Research, strategy, systematic problem solving. Adrian had mistaken my generosity for weakness, my love for stupidity. He was about to learn the difference between a victim and a very angry accountant. Elizabeth appeared in my doorway as I was finishing up my notes. "Your boyfriend is officially fucked," she announced with satisfaction. "I just got off the phone with Detective Ray Santos in the Financial Crimes Division. Turns out Mr. Adrian White has been on their radar for months." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "He's got complaints filed against him by 3 other women in the past 2 years. Same pattern, long-term relationships with successful professionals, systematic financial abuse, sudden disappearances when the victims got suspicious. The only reason he hasn't been arrested yet is because the previous victims were too embarrassed to press charges." "But I'm not too embarrassed," I said. "No," Elizabeth smiled grimly. "You're too pissed off. Detective Santos wants to meet with you this afternoon. With your evidence and their existing files, they'll have enough to charge him with multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny." I felt a surge of vindication so powerful it was almost intoxicating. Adrian thought he was so clever, so charming, so untouchable. He had no idea that his entire world was about to come crashing down around him. But even criminal charges weren't going to be enough. Adrian White had stolen more than money from me. He'd stolen 8 months of my life, my trust and love, my faith in my own judgment. Legal consequences would punish him, but they wouldn't repair the damage he'd done to my soul. For that, I needed something more personal. Friday evening found me exactly where I'd been 1 week ago, standing in front of my bedroom mirror, wearing a black dress, preparing for dinner. But this time, everything was different. This time I knew exactly who I was dealing with and I had a plan. Adrian had been calling and texting all day, presumably having discovered his belongings scattered across 5th Street in various states of weather damage. His messages had escalated from confused to concerned to panicked to angry. "Adrian, babe, someone broke into your building and threw my stuff outside. Are you okay? Adrian, Mel, please call me back. I'm worried about you. Adrian, Why aren't you answering? Did something happen? Adrian, this isn't funny anymore. Call me. Adrian, I'm coming over. But he hadn't come over. Because Adrian White was, at his core, a coward who only felt brave when he held all the cards. The moment the game changed, the moment he sensed that his control was slipping, he retreated to safer ground. I, however, was about to drag him back into the open. I picked up my phone and dialed his number. He answered on the first ring. Mel? Jesus, where have you been? I've been trying to reach you all day. I know, I said, keeping my voice carefully neutral. I'm sorry. I've been dealing with some work stuff. Crisis at the firm. Work stuff. His relief was palpable. Adrian's world made sense again. His walking ATM was just busy making more money for him to spend. What kind of crisis? The kind that involves a lot of lawyers and a lot of very unhappy clients, I said, allowing a note of exhaustion to creep into my voice. Listen, can you meet me for dinner tonight? I could really use someone to talk to. Of course, babe. Where do you want to go? Chateau Marmont, I said, savoring the way his breathing hitched on the other end. I know it's short notice, but I managed to get us a table for 8 o'clock. There was a long pause. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head, trying to figure out how to handle this unexpected complication. He was supposed to be having dinner with Bessie tonight. I knew this from the email I'd read on his laptop. But he also couldn't risk alienating his primary source of income when he was so close to making his final withdrawal. 8 o'clock sounds perfect, he said finally. I can't wait to see you, Mel. I've missed you. I've missed you too, I lied smoothly. Oh, and Adrian, wear that blue shirt I bought you last month. The one that brings out your eyes. The one that was in the pile of clothes on the street? He asked, his voice tight with confusion. What clothes on the street? I asked innocently. What are you talking about? Another long pause. Never mind. I'll find something else to wear. See you at 8, I said, and hung up before he could ask any more questions. The next call was to Miranda at Channel 7. We're on for tonight, I told her. He'll be at Chateau Marmont at 8 o'clock. Can your team be in position? Already handled, Miranda said. We'll have cameras set up across the street and a wireless mic on you. Just get him to talk about the scam on tape and we'll have everything we need for the story. What about Detective Santos? He'll be there too, off camera but ready to make the arrest as soon as you give the signal. This is going to be beautiful, Mel. Justice served with a side of public humiliation. My final call was to Elizabeth. Phase 1 is in motion, I told her. Are you ready for Phase 2? I've been ready since yesterday, she said with grim satisfaction. As soon as he's arrested, I'll release our findings to every financial institution in the city. His credit will be destroyed, his bank accounts frozen, and his ability to run this scam on anyone else will be permanently eliminated. And Phase 3. Bessie Caden, recently returned from California, currently employed at Emiliano and Associates advertising firm, Elizabeth recited from her notes. I've got her work email, her home address, and detailed records of every gift she's received from Adrian using your money. She'll get a very interesting package on Monday morning. I felt a cold smile spread across my lips. Bessie wasn't entirely innocent in this. The emails I'd read made it clear that she knew about me and had actively participated in planning my exploitation. But she was also another victim of Adrian's lies, even if she didn't realize it yet. When she discovered that her romantic reunion had been funded by fraud, that her Prince Charming was actually a career criminal, that her happily ever after was built on stolen money, well, that would be its own form of justice. Perfect, I said. Let's destroy this man. Chateau Marmont looked exactly the same as it had 3 nights ago when my world had collapsed. Same warm lighting, same intimate atmosphere, same couples sharing romantic dinners and whispered promises. But I felt like a completely different person walking through those doors. Adrian was already seated at a corner table, not the same one where I'd witnessed his betrayal, but close enough that I could see the exact spot where he'd called me pathetic. He looked nervous, fidgeting with his water glass and checking his phone every few seconds. His hair was perfectly styled, his clothes immaculate despite the fact that most of his wardrobe was currently decorating a city dumpster. He stood when he saw me approaching, his face lighting up with that charming smile that had once made my heart skip beats. Now it just looked like what it had always been, a mask hiding the predator underneath. Mel, he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. You look incredible. Thank you, I said, settling into my chair and noting the small wireless transmitter hidden beneath my bracelet. Miranda's team was listening to every word. You clean up pretty well yourself, considering your entire wardrobe apparently went missing. His smile flickered slightly. Yeah, about that. I think someone might have targeted your building. Maybe we should look into better security. Maybe, I agreed, opening my menu. Or maybe someone was trying to send a message. The waiter appeared before Adrian could respond and we ordered our drinks. Wine for him, water for me. I needed to stay sharp for what was coming. So tell me about this work crisis, Adrian said once we were alone again. You sounded really stressed on the phone. It's complicated, I said, studying his face. Even now, even knowing what I knew, part of me wanted to see some flicker of genuine concern, some hint that our 8 months together had meant something real to him. But his eyes held nothing but calculation. He was already figuring out how to leverage my supposed crisis to his advantage. You know you can talk to me about anything, he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. The same hand that had held Bessie's 3 nights ago. We're a team, remember? Are we? I asked softly. Of course we are. I love you, Mel. Whatever's going on, we'll figure it out together. The wine arrived and Adrian immediately drained half his glass. His nervousness was showing more clearly now. The way he kept glancing toward the door, the slight tremor in his voice, the beads of sweat forming along his hairline despite the restaurant's comfortable temperature. Actually, I said, leaning back in my chair, I've been thinking about us lately. About our relationship, our future together. Yeah. His eyes lit up with what I now recognized as greed rather than love. What kind of thinking? Well, we've been together for 8 months now. We've talked about moving in together, combining our finances, maybe even getting married someday. We have, he agreed eagerly. And I want all of that, Mel. I want everything with you. But I've been wondering, I continued, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest, what exactly you bring to this relationship? What you contribute? The question caught him off guard. He'd been expecting me to offer more money, more support, more of myself. He hadn't been prepared to justify his own worth. What do you mean? He stammered. I mean, I pay for everything. Your clothes, your food, your entertainment, your car insurance, your phone bill. I was even planning to pay the deposit on our apartment. So what exactly are you contributing to our partnership? His face flushed red. Mel, I can't believe you're keeping score like this. Love isn't about money. No, I agreed. It's not. So if it's not about money, you won't mind if I cancel the credit cards I gave you? If I stop paying for your expenses? If we split everything 50-50 from now on? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Adrian stared at me with growing panic, his charming mask finally beginning to slip. You're being ridiculous, he said finally. I'm between jobs right now, you know that. Once my graphic design business takes off. What graphic design business? I interrupted. I've never seen any of your work. I've never met any of your clients. I've never even seen you sit down at a computer to actually design anything. It's complicated. Building a client base takes time. 2 years. I asked. Because according to your friend Jake Damien, you've been between jobs for over 2 years. That's a long time to build a client base. The color drained from his face. How do you know about Jake? The same way I know about Bessie Caden, I said, watching his world crumble in real time. The same way I know about the other women you've scammed. The same way I know that you've been using me as your personal ATM while planning your happily ever after with someone else. Adrian opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. For the first time in 8 months he was speechless. Did you really think I was that stupid? I continued, my voice growing colder with each word. Did you honestly believe you could sit at this exact restaurant 3 nights ago, hold another woman's hand, and call me a pathetic walking ATM without consequences? His face went completely white. You were here? You heard. I heard everything, I said. Every laugh, every cruel joke, every plan you made with my money. I heard you tell your parents that Bessie was the love of your life while I was at home waiting for you to call and reschedule our date. Adrian's hands were shaking now. He looked around the restaurant desperately, as if searching for an escape route or perhaps hoping this was all some terrible nightmare. Mel, please let me explain. Explain what? How you've been committing credit card fraud for the past 6 months. How you've been stealing money from my account to fund your relationship with another woman. How you've been planning to abandon me as soon as you squeezed the last dollar out of my bank account. It's not like that, he said weakly. Then what is it like, Adrian? Please enlighten me. Tell me how this looks from your perspective. He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the exact moment when he realized his game was over. The charm, the lies, the manipulation, none of it was going to work anymore. His walking ATM had become something far more dangerous. An informed victim with resources. You don't understand, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Bessie and I, we have history. Real history. What we have is funded by my money, I interrupted. Every dinner you took her to, every gift you bought her, every hotel room where you made your plans, all of it paid for with fraudulent charges to my credit cards. I was going to pay you back. With what money, Adrian? You don't have a job. You don't have any income except what you steal from women who are stupid enough to love you. The word love hung in the air between us like an accusation. 8 months of my life, my heart, my trust, all of it reduced to a transaction that had never meant anything to him. How many others have there been? I asked quietly. What? How many other women have you done this to? How many other pathetic girls have funded your lifestyle while you laughed at their expense? Adrian's silence was answer enough. I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila folder, placing it on the table between us. Detective Santos from the Financial Crimes Division is very interested in meeting you. Apparently, you've been quite busy over the past few years. His eyes fixed on the folder like it contained his death sentence. Which in a way it did. The charges include identity theft, credit card fraud, grand larceny, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes, I continued conversationally. The prosecutor is confident they can get a conviction. Especially with your digital trail and the testimony of your previous victims. Previous victims? He repeated faintly. Oh yes, Adrian. Sarah Mitchell from 2023, Jessica Williams from early 2024, and Rebecca Rivera from last year. All successful professional women. All financially abused by the same charming man with the same sob story about being between jobs and needing temporary help. I opened the folder and spread the contents across the table. Bank statements, email printouts, photographs, police reports. The complete documentation of Adrian White's criminal career. Sarah was a doctor, I said, pointing to one of the files. You convinced her to pay for your medical equipment, for a business you were supposedly starting. $40,000 gone. Jessica was a lawyer who thought she was helping you through law school. $60,000 for tuition you never paid. Rebecca was a software engineer who funded your startup company to the tune of $35,000. Adrian stared at the evidence with the expression of a man watching his own execution. And then there's me, I continued. The biggest fool of all. The walking ATM who was so desperate for love that she ignored every red flag, explained away every inconsistency, and handed over her financial security to a professional con artist. Mel, please. But here's what you didn't count on, Adrian. You picked the wrong walking ATM this time. Because I'm not just any accountant. I'm a forensic accountant with connections in law enforcement, the media, and the financial industry. And unlike your previous victims, I'm not too embarrassed to destroy you. I glanced toward the restaurant's entrance, where I could see Detective Santos waiting discreetly near the hostess station. Miranda's camera crew would be positioned outside, ready to capture the moment when Adrian White's carefully constructed life finally collapsed. You have 2 choices, I said, closing the folder. You can come with me quietly to meet Detective Santos, confess to your crimes, and maybe negotiate a plea deal that gets you out of prison before you're 60. Or you can run, make this harder on yourself, and spend the next decade looking over your shoulder while every law enforcement agency in the state hunts you down. Adrian's breathing was shallow, panicked. You can't do this to me. I'm not doing anything to you, I said calmly. I'm simply allowing you to face the consequences of your own actions. You made the choice to steal from me, to lie to me, to treat me like garbage while I loved you. This is just the bill coming due. He looked around the restaurant one more time, his eyes wild with desperation. I could see him calculating his chances, weighing his options, trying to find some angle he could work, some charm he could deploy, some way to manipulate himself out of this situation. But there was nothing left. No more masks to wear, no more lies to tell, no more victims to exploit. The cameras are rolling, by the way, I mentioned casually. Channel 7 is doing an exposé on romance scammers who target professional women. You're going to be famous, Adrian. Just not in the way you always imagined. That broke him. The last vestige of his composure crumbled, and he slumped in his chair like a marionette whose strings had been cut. Why, he whispered. Why are you doing this to me? I studied his face for a moment. This man who had stolen 8 months of my life and convinced me I was worthless except for the money I could provide. Even now, even facing complete ruin, he couldn't understand what he'd done wrong. In his mind, he was still the victim, persecuted for the crime of being too charming, too clever, too deserving of other people's money. Because you made me believe I was pathetic, I said simply. Because you made me question my worth, my judgment, my capacity for love. Because you took something beautiful, my willingness to care for someone, and turned it into a weakness to be exploited. I stood up, smoothing my black dress, the same dress I'd worn to our first date when I'd believed in fairy tales and happy endings. And because, I continued, someone needs to make sure you never do this to anyone else ever again. I walked toward the restaurant entrance, leaving Adrian sitting alone at the table with the evidence of his crimes spread before him like a tarot reading of his future. I didn't look back, but I could hear him calling my name, his voice breaking with panic and desperation. Detective Santos stepped forward as I approached, his badge already visible. Miss Hollins, he said quietly. He's all yours, Detective, I replied. The arrest was swift and professional. Detective Santos approached the table while Adrian was still staring at the evidence folder, his face a mask of disbelief and terror. The handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists with a sound that I felt in my bones. The sound of justice, of accounts being settled, of 8 months of lies finally coming to an end. Other diners turned to watch as Adrian was led through the restaurant, their conversations dying into whispered speculation. The man who had once commanded every room with his charm and confidence was now just another criminal being taken into custody, his head down, his shoulders hunched with shame. I followed at a distance, watching through the restaurant windows as Miranda's news crew captured every moment of his humiliation. The bright camera lights illuminated his face as Detective Santos read him his rights, and I could see the exact moment when Adrian realized that his arrest was being broadcast to the entire city. Ma'am. The voice belonged to Detective Santos, who had returned to the restaurant after securing Adrian in the patrol car. Would you be able to come to the station tonight to give your formal statement? Of course, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Whatever you need. This was good work, he said, his weathered face creasing into an approving smile. Most victims of romance scams are too embarrassed to come forward. But you've just helped us close cases that have been open for years. Most victims. The phrase echoed in my mind as I walked out of the restaurant and into the cool October night. I wasn't most victims. I was Melinda Hollins, and I had just orchestrated the complete destruction of the man who had tried to destroy me. But as I stood on the sidewalk watching the patrol car disappear into the city traffic, I realized that the arrest was only the beginning. Adrian White's punishment would be measured in years of prison time, but his impact on my life would take longer to undo. I pulled out my phone and dialed Elizabeth. Please tell me you got it all on tape, she said without preamble. Every word, I confirmed. He's on his way to central booking right now. Perfect. I'm releasing the financial analysis to the media in 30 minutes. By tomorrow morning, every bank, credit union, and financial institution in the tri-state area will have his photo and a detailed description of his methods. What about Bessie? That's where things get interesting, Elizabeth said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. I did some digging into Ms. Caden's background. Turns out she's not quite the innocent victim we thought she was. My blood went cold. What do you mean? I mean she's been running the same scam on the West Coast for the past 2 years. Different methods. She poses as a struggling artist who needs financial support to pursue her dream, but the same basic con. She's bilked at least 6 men out of their savings since she moved to California. The pieces clicked together in my mind with sickening clarity. Adrian and Bessie weren't just reuniting lovers. They were business partners. 2 professional con artists who had found each other and decided to combine their operations. So when she moved back to New York, I began. She was coming back to work with Adrian, Elizabeth finished. They were planning to expand their operation, probably target married couples, elderly people with retirement savings, maybe even small business owners. The thought made me physically ill. If I hadn't followed Adrian to that restaurant, if I hadn't overheard their conversation, how many more people would have fallen victim to their schemes? How many lives would have been destroyed while I unknowingly funded their criminal enterprise? We have to stop her, I said. Already in motion, Elizabeth replied. I've been in contact with the Los Angeles Police Department all day. They've been looking for her in connection with several fraud cases. She's going to have some very interesting visitors tomorrow morning. And the evidence package you mentioned? Being delivered as we speak. Along with copies to her employer, her landlord, and her family in Ohio. By Monday morning, Bessie Caden's carefully constructed new life is going to collapse just as completely as Adrian's did tonight. I felt a surge of vindication so powerful it was almost intoxicating. Justice wasn't just catching Adrian. It was dismantling their entire operation, making sure that neither of them could hurt anyone else the way they'd hurt me. But beneath the satisfaction was something else. Something that felt like grief for the woman I'd been just a week ago. Trusting, generous, willing to believe in love even when all the evidence pointed toward deception. Mel. Elizabeth's voice was gentle. You did the right thing. You know that, right? I know, I said, though the words felt hollow. It's just, I keep thinking about all the signs I missed, all the times I explained away his behavior, all the money I threw at a relationship that never existed. That's not your fault. These people are professionals. They make a living manipulating emotions and exploiting trust. The fact that you're a good person who wanted to help someone you loved doesn't make you stupid. It makes you human. A human who lost over $50,000 to a con artist, I said bitterly. A human who lost $50,000 but gained something far more valuable, Elizabeth corrected. You gained the knowledge that you're strong enough to fight back, smart enough to gather evidence, and brave enough to seek justice. Adrian White picked the wrong victim, Mel. And now he's going to spend the next few years thinking about that mistake from a prison cell. After I hung up with Elizabeth, I walked slowly through the city streets, my mind spinning with everything that had happened. The arrest, the evidence, the revelation about Bessie. It was all happening so fast that I could barely process it. My phone buzzed with a text message from Miranda. The story airs tomorrow at 6 p.m. You're going to help a lot of people, Mel. Thank you for having the courage to speak out. Another message, this one from Detective Santos. Formal charging tomorrow morning. With your evidence and testimony, we're looking at 5 to 7 years minimum. Justice is served. 5 to 7 years. It seemed both like too much and not nearly enough for what Adrian had done. No amount of prison time could give me back the 8 months I'd spent loving someone who saw me as nothing more than a source of income. No sentence could restore my faith in love, my trust in my own judgment, my belief that fairy tales could come true. But it was a start. The story broke on Channel 7 the next evening with the kind of impact that Miranda had promised. Romance Scammer Targets Professional Women was the lead story, complete with Adrian's arrest footage, interviews with his previous victims, and a detailed breakdown of his criminal methods. I watched from my apartment, curled up on my couch with a glass of wine and a newfound appreciation for the power of good investigative journalism. Miranda had handled the story with perfect balance, exposing Adrian's crimes without sensationalizing the victim's pain, educating viewers about romance scam warning signs without making anyone feel stupid for having fallen for them. My phone didn't stop ringing all evening. Reporters wanting follow-up interviews, friends who had seen the news and wanted to check on me, colleagues from the firm offering their support. Even my mother called from Florida, her voice tight with worry and barely contained rage at the man who had hurt her daughter. But the call that mattered most came at almost midnight. Is this Melinda Hollins? The voice was unfamiliar, hesitant. Yes, this is Melinda. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I was one of the women in the news story tonight. One of Adrian's previous victims. The doctor who had lost $40,000 to Adrian's medical equipment scam. Sarah, I said, sitting up straighter. I'm so glad you called. I wanted to thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. For 3 years I've been carrying around this shame, this feeling that I was just a stupid woman who fell for a pretty face. But watching your story tonight, seeing how methodical his approach was, how carefully he planned everything, It helped me realize that what happened wasn't my fault. It wasn't your fault, I said firmly. None of it was. Adrian is a professional criminal who makes a living exploiting good people. That's on him, not on us. The detective called me today, Sarah continued. He said that with your evidence and testimony, they have enough to prosecute Adrian for all of his crimes, including what he did to me. I never thought I'd see justice for what he took from me. We talked for another hour, sharing our experiences, comparing the lies Adrian had told us, marveling at the consistency of his manipulation tactics. By the time we hung up, something had shifted inside me. The shame I'd been carrying, the sense that I'd been uniquely foolish, had begun to dissolve. I wasn't alone in this. I wasn't the only intelligent, successful woman who had fallen for Adrian's charm. I was part of a community of survivors who were finally getting justice. Over the next few days, more women came forward. Jessica the lawyer. Rebecca the software engineer. 3 others who had never reported their experiences to police but who recognized Adrian's photo from the news coverage. Each conversation, each shared story, each moment of mutual support helped heal something that Adrian had broken inside me. The legal proceedings moved quickly. Adrian's court-appointed attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor wasn't interested in leniency. With 6 victims, documented fraud totaling over $200,000, and clear evidence of an organized criminal enterprise, the state was seeking maximum penalties. Bessie Caden's arrest in Los Angeles made national news when it was revealed that she and Adrian had been coordinating their scams across state lines. The FBI became involved, expanding the investigation to look for additional victims and co-conspirators. Elizabeth kept me updated on the financial recovery efforts. Asset forfeiture proceedings had frozen Adrian's bank accounts and placed liens on anything he'd purchased with stolen money. It would take months to sort through everything, but there was a good chance that the victims would recover at least some of their losses. But the most satisfying update came from an unexpected source. I was working late at the office one Thursday evening when my assistant knocked on my door. "There's someone here to see you," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "She says her name is Bessie Caden." My blood turned to ice. Bessie was supposed to be in custody in Los Angeles. What was she doing in New York? What was she doing at my office? "Should I call security?" my assistant asked, noting my expression. "No," I said after a moment. "Send her in. But stay close." Bessie Caden looked nothing like the radiant woman I'd seen at the restaurant that night. Her auburn hair was dull and unkempt, her clothes wrinkled and ill-fitting. She looked like someone who hadn't slept in days, who was holding herself together through sheer force of will. "Miss Hollins," she said as she entered my office, her voice carefully controlled. "Thank you for seeing me." "Miss Caden," I replied coolly, not bothering to stand or offer her a seat. "I was under the impression that you were in police custody." "I made bail yesterday," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk without invitation. "My lawyer advised against coming here, but I felt like I owed you an explanation." "You don't owe me anything," I said. "You and Adrian made it very clear what you thought of me." Bessie winced at the mention of Adrian's name. "That's what I want to explain. What you heard that night at the restaurant. It wasn't the whole truth." I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. Even now, even after everything that had happened, she was still trying to run a con. Still trying to manipulate someone into believing her version of events. "Really?" I said. "What part of pathetic walking ATM did I misunderstand?" "I never called you that," Bessie said quietly. "That was all Adrian. And when he said those things, when his parents laughed, I felt sick. But I was trapped." "Trapped?" I repeated incredulously. "You were trapped into planning a future with stolen money?" "You don't understand," Bessie said, her composure beginning to crack. "Adrian told me that you knew about our relationship. He said you were okay with it, that you were helping him financially because you wanted him to be happy, even if it wasn't with you." The lie was so audacious, so perfectly crafted that for a moment I was speechless. "He told me you were a friend," Bessie continued. "Someone who had helped him get back on his feet after his last relationship ended. He said you were like a sister to him, that you understood that we belonged together but wanted to support him anyway." "And you believed that?" I asked. "I wanted to believe it," she admitted, "because the alternative was accepting that the man I loved was a criminal who was destroying innocent people's lives to fund our relationship." I stared at her for a long moment, trying to decide if this was just another layer of manipulation or if there was actually some truth to what she was saying. "The night you overheard us at the restaurant," Bessie said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "that was the first time I heard him talk about you the way he really saw you. And I realized that if he could be so cruel about someone who had shown him nothing but kindness, then everything he'd told me about our relationship was probably a lie too. So what happened after I left?" "I confronted him," Bessie said. "Right there at the table in front of his parents. I asked him if what he'd said about you was true, if he'd been lying to me about your arrangement. He tried to charm his way out of it, but I could see the truth in his eyes." She paused, her hands twisting in her lap. "I left him at the restaurant that night. Told him I never wanted to see him again. That's when I found out about the warrant for my arrest in California. Adrian had been using my identity to open credit cards, taking out loans in my name. He'd been running his East Coast operation using my credit history while I was scamming people in Los Angeles." The pieces of the puzzle were clicking into place, painting a picture that was somehow even more twisted than I'd originally imagined. Adrian hadn't just been running parallel cons. He'd been victimizing his own supposed partner, using her identity to expand his criminal enterprise while keeping her in the dark about the full scope of his activities. "I know you have no reason to believe me," Bessie said. "And I know that what I did in California was wrong regardless of what Adrian was doing here. But I wanted you to know that not everything you heard that night was real. Adrian had been lying to both of us, manipulating both of us, using both of us." I studied her face, looking for signs of deception, for the calculated charm that I'd learned to recognize in Adrian. But all I saw was exhaustion, regret, and something that looked like genuine remorse. "What do you want from me?" I asked finally. "Nothing," Bessie said, standing to leave. "I just wanted you to know that when I thought I was getting back together with the love of my life, I had no idea that it was at your expense. And I wanted to apologize for my part in hurting you, even if I didn't understand what was really happening at the time." She reached the door before turning back. "Adrian White is a monster," she said quietly. "And the worst part is that he's so good at what he does that he can make you believe you're the villain in your own story. I'm glad you were strong enough to fight back. I wish I had been." After she left, I sat in my office for a long time, staring out at the city lights and trying to process what I'd just heard. Was Bessie telling the truth about being manipulated by Adrian? Or was this just another layer of their con, designed to make me feel sorry for her and maybe even help her with her legal troubles? Didn't matter, I realized. Whether Bessie was a victim or a co-conspirator, whether her regret was genuine or performed, the outcome was the same. Adrian White was going to prison for his crimes. His ability to hurt innocent people was over. And I was going to rebuild my life on my own terms. 6 months later, I stood in the bathroom of my new apartment, applying lipstick in the same shade of red I'd worn the night my old life ended. But everything else was different now. The apartment was smaller but entirely mine. No traces of anyone else's belongings, no memories of shared meals or whispered promises. The woman in the mirror looked older, wiser, and infinitely stronger than the one who had once believed in fairy tales. Adrian's trial had ended 3 weeks ago with a conviction on all counts. 7 years in federal prison followed by 5 years of supervised probation. The judge had been particularly harsh in her sentencing remarks, noting that romance scams caused profound and lasting psychological damage to victims and that Adrian had shown a complete lack of remorse or empathy for the people he victimized. I had been in the courtroom for the sentencing, sitting in the front row with Sarah, Jessica, Rebecca, and the other women whose lives Adrian had destroyed. When the judge read the verdict, when the bailiff led Adrian away in handcuffs for the final time, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not revenge, but closure. The man who had made me question my worth, my judgment, my capacity for love was no longer a threat to anyone. He was just another criminal paying the price for his crimes. Bessie Caden had pleaded guilty to fraud charges in California and been sentenced to 3 years in prison. During her plea hearing, she had provided testimony that helped authorities uncover additional victims and recover stolen assets. Whether her cooperation was motivated by genuine remorse or just a desire for a lighter sentence, it had helped ensure that more people got justice. The financial recovery had been better than expected. Between asset forfeiture, insurance claims, and restitution orders, I had recovered about 60% of what Adrian had stolen from me. More importantly, the experience had led to new opportunities. Several law firms had approached me about consulting on financial fraud cases, and I was considering a career shift into forensic accounting full-time. But the most significant change wasn't professional or financial. It was personal. I had learned to trust myself again. Not the naive trust that had made me vulnerable to Adrian's manipulation, but a deeper, more mature understanding of my own worth and boundaries. I had learned that generosity was still a virtue, but that it needed to be balanced with wisdom. That love was still worth pursuing, but that it required honesty, respect, and mutual support to be real. My phone buzzed with a text message from Miranda. "Ready for tonight's interview? The documentary team is excited to meet you." Tonight was the taping of my interview for Stolen Hearts, a feature-length documentary about romance scams that would air on Netflix next month. The producers had approached me after seeing Miranda's original news story, wanting to explore the psychology of both perpetrators and victims in depth. I had hesitated at first. The idea of sharing my story on a national platform, of having my mistakes and heartbreak analyzed for entertainment, had felt overwhelming. But then I thought about all the women who were probably sitting in restaurants right now, listening to charming men tell elaborate lies, handing over their hearts and their bank accounts to professional predators. If my story could help even one person recognize the warning signs, if it could give even one victim the courage to fight back, then the embarrassment would be worth it. "Ready as I'll ever be," I texted back. The documentary interview was scheduled for 7 o'clock at a production studio downtown. I had an hour to kill, so I decided to walk through Central Park, to clear my head and prepare for what would undoubtedly be an emotionally challenging conversation. The park was beautiful in the late afternoon light, filled with joggers and dog walkers and couples sharing romantic moments on benches. 6 months ago, seeing those couples would have filled me with bitter cynicism. Now I found myself hoping their love was real, that their trust was well placed, that their stories would have happier endings than mine had. I was watching a young couple feeding ducks by the pond when someone cleared their throat behind me. "Excuse me, are you Melinda Hollins?" I turned to find a man in his mid-30s, tall and lean with kind eyes and a slightly nervous smile. He was holding a copy of the Wall Street Journal, and I could see my name on the front page of the business section. An article about my new consulting firm that had been published that morning. "Yes," I said cautiously. 6 months of dealing with reporters and documentary producers had made me wary of strangers who recognized me. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said quickly. "My name is Michael Edwards. I'm a financial crimes prosecutor with the Manhattan DA's office. I wanted to thank you for the work you've been doing." "Thank me. Your testimony in the White case, the financial analysis you provided, the way you've been speaking out about romance scams, it's made a huge difference in how we prosecute these cases," Michael said. "We've seen a 30% increase in victims coming forward since your story went public." That's wonderful to hear," I said, surprised by how much his words meant to me. "I was actually hoping to ask you about consulting on a case we're building," he continued. "It's similar to what you experienced. A serial romance scammer who's been targeting professional women across the tri-state area. We could really use someone with your expertise and insight." I found myself studying his face as he spoke, noting the genuine passion in his voice when he talked about seeking justice for victims, the way his eyes lit up when he described the impact of my work. There was something refreshing about his directness, his professional focus, his obvious respect for what I'd been through. "I'd be interested in hearing more," I said. "Do you have a card?" He handed me a business card, our fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. "There's a case briefing next Thursday at 2 o'clock. Would you be available?" "I'll check my calendar," I said, slipping the card into my purse. "Great," Michael said, his smile widening. "And Miss Hollins? What you did, fighting back the way you did, refusing to be silenced or ashamed, that took incredible courage. I hope you know how many people you've helped." After he walked away, I stood by the pond for a few more minutes, watching the ducks glide across the water and thinking about unexpected encounters and second chances. Michael Edwards seemed like a good man, someone who shared my passion for justice and my commitment to protecting vulnerable people. But more than that, he seemed like someone who respected my strength rather than seeing it as a threat, who valued my intelligence rather than trying to exploit it, who understood that my past experiences had made me wiser rather than damaged. "Maybe," I thought as I headed toward the documentary studio, I was ready to start believing in possibilities again. The rain drummed against my office window as I finished reviewing the financial records for the Emiliano case. Another romance scammer, another pattern of manipulation and theft, another opportunity to seek justice for women who had been told they were worthless except for their bank accounts. My consulting firm, Holland's Financial Investigations, now employed 12 people and handled cases across the eastern United States. We specialized in financial fraud analysis, asset recovery, and victim advocacy, using the skills I'd developed as Adrian White's victim to help other survivors fight back against their abusers. The work was challenging, sometimes heartbreaking, but always meaningful. Every case we closed, every perpetrator we helped convict, every dollar we recovered felt like a small victory over the cynicism and despair that had once threatened to consume me. My personal life had undergone its own transformation. Michael Edwards and I had been dating for 2 years now, building our relationship slowly, carefully, on a foundation of mutual respect and shared values. He understood my trust issues, my need for independence, my commitment to my work. And I had learned to recognize the difference between a man who supported my strength and one who sought to exploit my vulnerabilities. We were talking about moving in together, maybe even getting married someday. But this time I was approaching love with wisdom as well as hope, with boundaries as well as generosity. My phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject line made my blood run cold. Adrian White, parole hearing. I opened the message with trembling fingers. Adrian was eligible for early parole after serving 4 years of his 7-year sentence. The hearing was scheduled for next month, and as a victim, I had the right to provide testimony about the impact of his crimes. I stared at the email for a long time, memories flooding back of that night at Chateau Marmont, of the arrest, of the trial where Adrian had finally been forced to face the consequences of his actions. 4 years had passed, but the wounds he'd inflicted still felt fresh sometimes, still influenced the way I approached relationships and trust. But they no longer defined me. I picked up my phone and called Detective Santos, who had become a friend over the years. "Ray, it's Melinda. I just got the notification about Adrian's parole hearing." "I figured you might," Santos said. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that Adrian White served his time according to the law, and if the parole board believes he's been rehabilitated, then that's their decision to make." "You're not going to fight the parole?" I considered the question carefully. Part of me wanted to keep Adrian locked away forever, to ensure that he could never hurt another woman the way he'd hurt me. But a larger part of me recognized that my healing couldn't depend on his continued imprisonment. "I'm going to attend the hearing," I said finally. "I'm going to tell the board about the impact of his crimes, about the work we've done to help other victims, about the importance of monitoring repeat offenders. But I'm not going to let fear of Adrian White control my life anymore." "That's very mature of you, Mel." "It's taken me 4 years to get here," I admitted. "But I think I'm finally ready to close this chapter completely." After I hung up with Santos, I sat in my office for a while, watching the rain streak down the windows and thinking about cycles of pain and healing, about justice and forgiveness, about the woman I'd been and the woman I'd become. Adrian White had tried to reduce me to nothing more than a source of income, had made me believe I was pathetic and desperate and worthless. But in fighting back against him, in refusing to be silenced or ashamed, I had discovered strengths I never knew I possessed. I had learned that I was brave enough to seek justice, smart enough to outmaneuver professional criminals, and strong enough to rebuild my life on my own terms. I had learned that my generosity was a gift, not a weakness, and that my capacity for love was something to be treasured, not exploited. Most importantly, I had learned that my worth wasn't determined by someone else's treatment of me, but by my own actions, my own choices, my own commitment to using my experiences to help others. The rain began to slow and shafts of late afternoon sunlight broke through the clouds, casting golden patterns across my desk. Somewhere across the city, women were probably sitting in restaurants, listening to charming men tell elaborate lies, handing over their hearts and their wallets to predators in expensive suits. But now there were resources for them, support systems, people who understood what they were going through. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "Holland's Financial Investigations, this is Melinda." "Miss Hollands." The voice was young, scared, barely above a whisper. "My name is Amanda. I think I need your help. I saw the documentary about you and I think..." I think my boyfriend might be doing the same thing to me that Adrian did to you." I felt my heart clench with familiar pain and determination. Another victim, another woman who had discovered that her love story was actually a crime story, another opportunity to help someone fight back. "Amanda," I said, my voice gentle but strong, "you've come to the right place. Tell me what's been happening." As I listened to her story, the same patterns, the same lies, the same systematic exploitation disguised as love, I thought about the woman I'd been 4 years ago, sitting in my apartment surrounded by Adrian's belongings, believing that my capacity for generosity made me pathetic. I had been wrong about so many things back then. Wrong about love, wrong about trust, wrong about my own worth. But I had been right about one thing. Revenge was indeed a dish best served cold. My revenge against Adrian White hadn't been the arrest, the conviction, or the prison sentence. Those were just justice, consequences for his crimes that any victim deserved to see. My real revenge had been refusing to let his cruelty define me. It had been building a life and a career dedicated to helping other women fight back. It had been turning my pain into purpose, my vulnerability into strength, my heartbreak into a force for good in the world. Adrian White had tried to break me, to reduce me to nothing more than a source of income. Instead, he had created his own worst nightmare. A woman who was stronger, smarter, and more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. And that woman was just getting started. "Amanda," I said, pulling out a fresh legal pad and uncapping my pen, "let's start from the beginning. And don't worry, we're going to make sure this man never hurts you or anyone else again." Outside my window, the sun broke fully through the clouds, bathing the city in golden light. It was going to be a beautiful evening. A perfect evening for justice. The rain had stopped, but the reckoning was just beginning.